emotional intelligence is really about what it means to be intrinsically motivated. I'm going to be doing some trainings out in the Dallas area school district with their gifted program. And part of the work that I'm going to be doing with the students that have been designated gifted is training them in intrinsic motivation. Because it's very different to be motivated for a grade because it's a high expectation because you've been labeled gifted versus being motivated to do well because it is something that is really, really deep down inside of you. It's coming from this place that's not external, right? And we actually need training in that because most of us are very much rewarded by or motivated by things that are external to us. Emotional intelligence requires, though, that you start thinking about the degree to which you are intrinsically motivated. So I want you to think about some things, and these are also questions that are in your packet. Are you self-motivated, or do you struggle with that? Are you a good leader of your life? When you think about your position as a leader of a team or a manager of a team, your management and leadership skills are only going to be as good as your own leadership skills are and management skills are related to how you conduct yourself in your own life. So I always say if you had to give yourself a grade in terms of your own personal leadership of your own life or management of your own life, you don't want to assign yourself a D or an F if you're in charge of leading other people. There's an unalignment there that needs to be straightened out. Okay. Do you feed your very natural, innate desire for growth? This is something that we know about human beings, whether they're toddlers or even infants, I dare say. We see in infants an innate desire for to be stimulated for their own growth. Our need for growth doesn't end. So do you nurture that? Or are you so busy that you have forgotten to nurture that? For example, being here, participating in this, is one of the ways in which, especially if you're interested in it and you're thinking about these things, is a good sign that you're actually nurturing that very innate part of who you are. It's really important for motivation. This is a bigger question, more sort of esoteric question. Do you proactively look for ways to leave a legacy or to live a life of great meaning? Now, it's really difficult to think about legacy and do I live a life of great meaning and purpose when you've got a 3-year-old that has decided I'm going to stop sleeping, right? Or your child has a delay and you're trying to get to school, or you're trying to get to work and they're trying to get to school and the roads are icy. Like, you're not thinking about legacy and meaning and purpose. But we want to give that some kind of attention for the following reason. I want to say really quickly that intrinsic motivation, when motivation comes from the inside, is a very powerful antidote to apathy, to anxiety, to a lot of negativity, a lot of complaining, to depression, and lack of direction. So when and if you're feeling any of these things, when you have an employee, a group or team member that's kind of in this boat, one of the places you can go in your own mind is, in what way is this person lacking intrinsic motivation? This is one of the reasons why in an organization, your mission statement, and I've read your mission statement, and I would get on board with your mission, right? I think it's a great mission. That would make me want to come to work. If I could help people affordably plan vacations that they could really enjoy on a regular basis, only because I know what the value of travel is to one's well-being. And it's not just about going somewhere and relaxing. There's all kinds of evidence, scientific evidence, that reveals the centrality of travel in critical thinking, in creative thinking, and in innovation. Our brains work differently the more we travel. So there are a lot of reasons why travel is important. So in terms of intrinsic motivation, as a person who might be employed in this organization, you want to ask yourself, are our employees well socialized into our mission and the importance of travel and providing that for others, that they can get here and go maybe above and beyond what the expectations are, because they feel like their work has a lot of purpose and meaning beyond the external motivation, which is I come to work and I derive a paycheck. Do you see? Okay. That's a different kind of employee. The employee that's coming only to derive the paycheck versus the employee that's getting paid but also feels very intrinsically motivated by the mission of this company. So, perfect intrinsic motivation is a great antidote to those things. A couple of things to think about. These are the things to think about in your own time. They are in your packet. What gets you up and out of bed every morning? That is linked to what your purpose is. And right now, your purpose might be what gets me out of bed every morning is the things that I need to do to care for this 3-year-old. Right? Or what gets me out of bed every morning, gets my feet on the floor, gets my butt in the car to get here to drive through snow and ice, is that I help people affordably get to go on vacations. That is great for their well-being, whatever it is. And your purpose might have nothing to do with your profession. It might be something separate from your profession. What makes me feel most alive, and how can I do more of that? That gets to life fulfillment. I know that there are things for all of you that you engage in, experiences that you are drawn to that just make you feel alive. Travel is one of them for many people. I feel more alive when I'm traveling. So every time I can feed myself with travel experiences, I feel more fulfilled, because fulfillment is critical to your intrinsic motivation. What do I want others to most remember about me? In other words, am I conducting myself? Am I engaging in relationships and activities where people are better because I exist? That in a conversation with someone, I know and I strive that when that conversation is over, that they are better for having had the conversation. Do you see? But the second question is the most profound, and that is, am I living the life I want to live? And it's profound, related to intrinsic motivation, because so many of us cancel out that part of ourselves. And it really comes out of a body of work that I was very moved by several years ago. It's a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, and it was written by a palliative care nurse, a hospice nurse, who worked in the UK. Did I tell this story? Mm-hmm. Did I tell it in this training?
I think so.
Yeah, do you remember? She interviewed all these people who, on their deathbeds, and she found that there were these themes. What did they most regret was the question. And the number one top regret of the dying is, I didn't live the life I wanted to live. I lived a life expected of me. Or I thought I'd get to the life that I wanted to live if I had more time. So we don't want to be that person on the deathbed having the realization of, I thought there'd be more time. Or I wish I had the courage to live the life I wanted to live the life I was choosing versus the one chosen for me. So all of these things, if we really contemplate them, become fuel for your intrinsic motivation. What gets you up and out and into the world, having you live a life that feels full of meaning, that feels fulfilling, and one in which, because you are fulfilled and intrinsically motivated, everyone around you benefits. I don't need to know what your intrinsic motivation is, but it comes through in your energy. And when it comes through in your energy, it impacts me. Okay? Just a really, really quick tip on this, because I could talk about intrinsic motivation for a long time, but we don't have time. I want you to remember this for those you lead. This is really a really important thing to know from leadership in business. What truly motivates us? All right, this comes from the most recent study on human motivation by Daniel Pink. And he writes that there are 3 things that, if they are in place in an organizational setting, motivate others to do their best work. I argue, or I suggest, that if these 3 things are in place in a person's life, you will motivate them beyond anything that they ever imagined possible. One is autonomy. As a human being, I am highly motivated if others around me treat me as an autonomous, independent individual who is self-directed. In other words, as my leader, as my boss, as my manager, you actually trust me, even just a little bit, to make my own decisions on behalf of the organization, as opposed to micromanaging me. If you micromanage me, if you don't give me any kind of autonomy, I will leave the job, I will be unsatisfied with the job, or you will never get from me my full potential. Okay? Number 2, mastery. Do you give me opportunities to actually master something here? Do you give me opportunities to become like the expert in whatever it is, so that I am known here as someone who does that thing really, really well?
The conversions are.
There you are.
Crown off,
Yeah. You've mastered conversion, and you wear the crown. That's a great example. But doesn't that feel good?
I wear the crown.
Because you told me, I'll wear this crown every time.
Once a month.
Intrinsically motivated. Right?
Except January.
And then finally, purpose. If I feel like whatever it is that I'm doing is making some kind of difference, I will continue to do it, and I will do it at a high level. And sometimes it's our responsibility as leaders and managers to make the purpose known to those we're leading and managing. Like, really think about that. How can I talk with them in a way about the work that we do here that makes them feel like this is really purposeful work? Giving people vacations, opportunities for vacations, is really purposeful work. I work with a couple of banks, and I do a lot of training for executive leaders and how to talk to those they manage about the psychology of money and how valuable their work is. Because money matters so much to us. It matters so much to our well-being, and people have a lot of anxiety around it. So when they can inspire in people at every level of their organization, from the bank teller to the mortgage lender to anyone at any level of the organization, that, anytime you're in the face-to-face with a client, or on the phone you are doing really important and purposeful work, because people have a great attachment to their financial well-being. So the way that you work with them is really critical. So it's incumbent upon any leader or manager to inspire within others in the organization intrinsic motivation, so that when they're here working, they are motivated beyond the paycheck. That's the best kind of organizational culture. Does that make sense? Okay. So, again, when you think about emotional intelligence and growing your own emotional intelligence, you want to ask yourself, to what degree am I intrinsically motivated? And what changes might I need to make in my life to better fuel that up? And as someone who works in an organization where I'm leading and managing others, do I do a good job at inspiring within them how important it is to be intrinsically motivated, and I don't recommend going back to your groups or teams unless you want to give them a variation of this training on this. But I don't recommend that you sit down with them and say, today I want to talk with you about how it is you're intrinsically motivated, because they'll look at you like, what are you talking about? There are real subtle ways in which you can convey this to them in the way that you're showing up, right? Okay. Empathy, considered the fourth quality of emotional intelligence, but considered the second most important next to what?
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness. Right? I could talk about empathy all day long. Most people confuse empathy with sympathy. Most people do not practice empathy at all. They think they are. It is the rare person, actually, that's truly empathetic, only because, not because they're special, only because we don't receive any kind of formal training in what empathy really is. So I'm giving you the secret to empathy here. And this is really important. Empathy simply means to sit beside or to be with another person in their difficulty or their suffering. To sit beside them, to be with them in their difficulty or their suffering without trying to change it, without trying to make it go away, without trying to diminish it, like you shouldn't feel that way, or minimize it. Empathy is a very rare quality because when someone I know, a colleague, coworker, someone I love is suffering as a human being, what do I want to do?
Fix it.
I want to fix it. I want to change it. I don't want them to suffer. I don't want them to suffer because I love them and care about them. But I also don't want them to suffer because their suffering makes me uncomfortable. This is one of the reasons why when we are suffering and someone in our life is trying to convince us that we shouldn't feel that way, or is trying to minimize what we're feeling, we want to punch them in the face. It doesn't help, right? And you have to know that what they're doing, they are doing because they care about you and because they themselves cannot bear to feel what you're feeling. The word empathy itself only came into our vocabulary in 1908. It is a new term in our vocabulary. And it comes out of a Greek term that means in feeling. And what it means is when I am truly empathetic, I can feel what you're feeling. I am in feeling with you. What it means is that I resonate with what you're feeling. This is why empathy is rare. Because when I'm truly empathetic, I don't have to have had the experience that you're having to feel for you or to feel with you. But something about what you're feeling arouses something in me that reminds me of a pain or a suffering I once had. Do you see? So your pain, your suffering resonates with something I already know. And most of us don't want to go there. So Brené Brown, who writes a lot about empathy, writes that empathy is always the vulnerable choice. That when I make a decision to be empathetic, I make a decision to become vulnerable, to have some part of me get touched or moved by your pain. I was talking with my sister yesterday, and this was all on my mind because I knew I was going to teach about this today. And she told me a story about seeing a very close friend of hers. He lost his wife in August, young woman. They have 3 boys. And he woke up one morning and she was dead beside him. Very, very unexpected. So she died in August. So a couple of months have passed, but he's only now starting to come out of the shock of it all. So she saw him yesterday and she said, it was so hard for me to be present in that conversation with him. Not just because he's really fragile right now, but because I could hardly bear the discomfort I was feeling for him. And I said, don't beat yourself up. What you were feeling, this is a thing, this is a neurological thing, is you were feeling your empathic, caring, compassionate circuitry. We all have it. We have an empathic, caring, compassionate brain circuitry. So in the moment of having the conversation with her friend, and her heart's breaking for him, and she's finding it very painful to just feel what she's feeling, she's activated within herself the part of the brain that's empathic, that's caring and compassionate, that part of her heart that's really tender, the part of the heart that's like really raw, the part of the heart that about us that's really, really beautiful. And I said, as much as the discomfort was there, it just reminds you, you're a human being, and you were touched and you were moved by this. You resonated with that. And you didn't try to make his pain go away. You didn't try to say things. At least she died in her sleep, right? We say all kinds of things. Like, at least she didn't suffer. Those are statements that minimize the pain of another person. That's not empathy. All right, when you move into that, that's not empathy. So people will say, well, how the heck could I be empathetic? Like, well, what do I say? What do I do in those moments? So I always introduce what I call some empathy scripts. These are also in your packet. Just keep them in mind. Practice them. Rather than fixing or solving, you can say something like, this has really got to be hard. Right? I've said to people, this just has to suck. What do you need right now? But if you ask that question, you better be prepared to provide it. People who are in high states of grief or suffering will often say one of the hardest part of that for me was everyone who asked, what do you need? I'm here. Please call me, let me know. And when the dust settled, they were nowhere to be found. What do you need right now that I might be able to provide? That's not a ham ordered to your house or a meat platter if it's like a death in the family, right? Sometimes I'm just really honest and I'll say, I have no language to call upon right now in the face of this, and I just want you to know that. And sometimes you can see the person just like get a sigh of relief, like, thank God she's not going to try to fix me or tell me that I shouldn't feel this way or minimize what I'm feeling. Like, just sit beside someone. I see that you're suffering. I haven't had this same kind of suffering, but I can definitely see it and feel it in you. And I just want you to know that I'm here. And sometimes the most powerful form of empathy is just silence and touch. And by touch, I mean there are two parts of the body that really respond to empathy. My brother is a funeral director, and I remember him telling me when he was in mortuary school, he only had one class in how to deal with people in their grief, which I found mind-blowing. But he said that they taught him that there are two parts of the body that provide great comfort and ease, because as you might imagine, he has to be empathetic because he's walking into these situations every day, all day long. So he can't go into a family and, resolve their pain, fix their pain, change their pain. And people will say, we love your brother because he just had this calming presence. Because he doesn't try to do any of that, right? So the two parts of the body, if you take your hand and you just place it right here at the lower back, just like you've probably had someone do that, right? Or right up in the middle back, right at the side, here's my heart, that back side of my body, that upper part of the back side of the heart, placing your hand there. And you know that sometimes intuitively we do that, like, how you doing? Right? Or you just see somebody and you just take your hand and gently place it. That kind of touch feels very supportive. I have your back. I know your heart hurts. So sometimes silence and touch. I remember just sitting across, this was not too long ago, sitting across the table with a friend of mine who just lost her father, and rather than going through, we were in a restaurant, she was crying, and I felt uncomfortable with it. I'm a human being. I felt my empathetic, caring, compassionate circuitry getting generated. I had to kind of sit on my hands because I wanted to not make her, not have her be going on like this in the restaurant, right? Ease her pain. And I was like, no, you teach empathy. So all he did was take my hand and bring it across the table. And she took my hand and we just sat there. And we sat there until, like I said, the loss came up and the loss passed away, right? It was just visiting and then it goes. That's why we say grief comes and goes in waves. And I didn't have to say a word, but it truly was the vulnerable choice. So one of the things that we know about the brain, there's a part of our brain that really gets lit up. It gets activated when we feel personally rewarded. For example, when you do volunteerism and you feel really rewarded by it, or you mentor or coach an employee into a higher level and you feel really rewarded. There's a part of your brain that actually gets activated and lit up. We could see it on an MRI light up. When we are empathetic, that same part of the brain lights up. Even though it's really hard for us because it's the vulnerable choice, because I have to feel something in order to be truly empathetic, the reward part of my brain gets lit up. Most of us feel better in having expressed empathy. And in feeling better, we stimulate all of those chemicals, all of those hormones, the oxytocin. I can't be empathetic, it's shut down. Shoulders down and back, lots of oxytocin. Serotonin. Those hormones that make us feel more calm and at ease are really come up, they're elevated. So practicing empathy isn't just a gift for the person you're extending it to, it's also a gift for you. Okay? So as much as possible, we know that empathy, we're hardwired for it. So we come in born with the hard wiring for it, but it has to be cultivated. We have to have opportunities to practice it. So what you want to ask yourself when you're thinking about empathy as a skill for the emotionally intelligent is, how often are you practicing empathy versus sympathy? Sympathy is, I feel sorry for you. Empathy is, I feel your pain and I'm going to let you be with it. Compassion is, I feel your pain and I'm going to seek to alleviate it. Okay? They are different things. They're both really important, or they're all very important. Sympathy, empathy, and compassion. But there's something about empathy that's really important. Empathy actually is a mindfulness practice, right? We say mindfulness, moment-to-moment awareness of what is here and now, without trying to make it any different than what it is. And just feeling at ease, even if it's the hardest thing. I'm not trying to change it. I'm up close and personal with it. This is what it is. Empathy is much like that. It requires mindfulness. You're suffering. I have discomfort about it. I feel really vulnerable in being here with you in it. But that's what I'm going to do. If you are at all, if you ever look at Harvard Business Review, online Harvard Business Review is an awesome resource for those of you who want to evolve yourself as managers and leaders. But you will see probably in the last 15 years or so, empathy coming up over and over and over again as a really important leadership trait. When those you lead and those you manage sense that you are an empathetic person and also have a strong capacity to lead, they respect you more, they feel more connected to you. In other words, do the people that you lead and manage see you as a human being? Can you have someone in your office who's having a difficulty or a breakdown and just kind of hold that space for them as opposed to trying to fix it, solve it, manage it? Okay? Really important for those of you in the room who HR. I'm sure you hear a lot, right?
Yes.
And really, it's an important skill not only for the person who's sitting across from you, who's having difficulties, it's also important for you to preserve yourself. Because if I'm all day long trying to fix, manage, resolve your pain and your suffering, I'm gonna go home exhausted, drained. Right? To be empathetic is also to kind of have some boundaries as well. You know, and it's really kind of freeing to know that, you know, when you start doing it, it's freeing to know that I don't have to make this go away for you. I don't have to talk you out of what you're feeling. When I had a conversation with my sister recently about what empathy really is, she started saying, I am not an empathetic parent. When my 9-year-old daughter comes home and she's going on about the different hurts she's experiencing on the playground or whatever it is, I'm saying things to her like, well, why do you feel that way? You shouldn't feel that way. You know, as opposed to just, she's 9 years old, she feels what she feels. You know, you don't feel that way as a woman in her 40s, right? But she feels that way. Think about all of the times in your life, personally and professionally, where you were talked out of your feelings or they were diminished. I came out of a generation, and some of you might relate to this or not, where, you know, the big phrase in my house was, how did it go? Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Right? I remember as a kid thinking, what the hell? What does that mean? I remember getting a doll for my 5th birthday. I was so excited about the doll, I started to cry. But at 5, you don't know the difference between crying in tears of joy and crying tears in pain. And it made my dad really uncomfortable. And he said, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. And I remember thinking, what is that? You know, like, that's such a confusing message. Totally non-empathetic, by the way, right? But that's an example of, you see a child crying and you're trying to correct it. Whatever it is that just happened doesn't warrant your tears or doesn't warrant the heartbreak that you feel. That's non-empathetic. And it's so important that in our parenting that we are modeling empathy, because it is such an important trait, quality to have as an individual who's going to go out and try to live in this really complex social world, which gets increasingly complex. So I'll bring us to the very end. As you might imagine, right? Emotional intelligence requires that you have really exceptional social skills. Well, the realm of social skills is vast. You know, we could do a training in just what good social skills are. And social skills cover things like nonverbal social skills, how you show up nonverbally. Requires how you handle yourself in your speaking. Strong social skills has everything to do with listening, how you listen. It has everything to do with how it is that you initiate relationships, how you manage them when there's problems, conflict, how you end them. Right? When I was teaching at the university for a long time, teaching relational communication, I had a whole unit on how to end a relationship. And my students were like, oh my God, this is invaluable, because nobody teaches us this, how to break up in a way that maintains the dignity and the respect of the other person and of the relationship. And many of us as adults don't know that. Like, there's a way to do that that's emotionally intelligent. So the gifts that I want to give you related to social skills, it's just one thing, one part of it. And that is, how do you conduct yourself in a way where you are showing up to your relationships, to other people, to your coworkers, to those you lead and manage, as a present person? A couple of questions, these are in your packet. These are provocative questions that you can ask yourself related to presence. Question number one is, I love this question. This is a good question that I ask myself when I know I'm entering into a sticky situation. I'll say to myself, all right, what version of myself needs to show up for this particular issue? What version of myself needs to show up today for this training? What version of myself needs to show up in a call with a potential new client? Like, I really think about this, because there's different versions of me, right? There's lots of different versions of you. The version of you that's sitting here right now is very different from the version of you that, might have lunch with a friend. There's all kinds of versions of ourselves, and there are versions of ourselves that do not lend themselves well to certain situations. This is when you know that someone is working at a low level of emotional intelligence, because they haven't thought about it. They haven't thought about the person they need to be to best handle whatever it is in front of them, okay? Second question is, what distractions do I need to eliminate in order to be fully present? I think I told you that part of the way I prime myself to be in a responsive relational mindset, to be present, is before I come into a training, I unplug from everything for at least 90 minutes before I come in. I don't listen to the news, I don't listen to the podcast, I try not to be on the phone. I have to do that so that I've eliminated distractions that would prevent me from being here 100%. Like, the worst thing for me to do would be to take a phone call before I came in here. Or what if I had that awful email I had the other day before I went into Wegmans and I had to come in to do this training? It would take me out of presence. How many of you know the HALT acronym? The HALT acronym is a good one because it halts you from going any further. Anyone? I should not take action. I should not aim to come in to give a presentation. The best version of myself is not going to be on when I am hungry, when I am angry, when I am lonely, when I am tired. Now, the H and the A has merged recently. How many of you have heard of hangry? Is it a thing?
Oh, it's a thing.
It is a thing, right?
I'm always hungry.
Pair that with anger. Yeah.
Oh, I know.
Not good, not good. I've dealt with people and I'm like, you know what, you need to eat a meal. Because we should not be having this conversation, right? These are just tips for, like, the HALT acronym is great, but because I know that HALT, if any of that's present, I'm in reactivity, not in responsiveness. Imagine if you ran yourself through HALT before you hit send. Or before you quickly reacted and sent a text message back. Okay? So remember HALT. Am I primed for reactivity or responsiveness? That's another really good question to ask yourself. And always remembering that when you and I have a coffee date or a dinner date or whatever it is, or we have a meeting together because we're working on a project, when I can show up as fully present as possible, it's a gift to the situation. You know, I don't wanna go into, you know, the evils of technology, but the various ways in which it's really interesting we're able now to be connected has actually made us so much more distracted. You know, increasingly, for example, I leave my phone in the car if I know that I'm gonna go have dinner with someone. Unless I need it for some sort of emergency, there's no reason for it to be present at the table. And just look around the next time you're at a restaurant at how many people are looking at the phone and noting that it is significantly diminishing all of their social skills and their ability to be present. So one of the most powerful messages, if I had to just boil it down, that you could give to another person to show that you're present is what we call the message of confirmation. And I can give the message in confirmation in the way that I show up physically, in my nonverbals. I can give the message of confirmation in the way that I speak with you. I can give the message of confirmation in the energy that I bring into a room. And this is the message of confirmation. And what's important about it is, regardless of who you're dealing with, someone in your personal life, someone in your professional life, a client on the phone, every human being loves to receive, thrives in the receiving of a message of confirmation. And the message of confirmation is this, and this is in your packet, but just take this in. I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge you. What you say, think, and feel matters and has value. I don't have to agree with you, but you matter. I see you means I don't just physically see you, but I am so present that I can see that you're a little off today. I can see that you're suffering in some way. I can see that you're really excited about something. I can see it in your nonverbals. I can see it in the way that you walked into the building today, because I'm plugged in. You don't know how many people I've heard say over the years, I could walk downstairs in a paper bag and my spouse wouldn't even notice, because in this marriage I'm invisible. That's powerful. To live with others and not see each other. And it happens. I hear you means I don't just hear the words coming in through my ears. I hear everything that's not being said. I hear that there's so much behind what you've just said. I hear that what you just said, the words that came out of your mouth, do not match up to your body language, because that's how present I am. I acknowledge you means you're in the room. You're at the table. This is especially important in group and teamwork. This is especially important in families. When you've got that one family member, that one group or team member that's not sharing, that's not contributing for whatever reason, I acknowledge that you are still at the table. I acknowledge that perhaps you need to be called forth. Do you see? It's incumbent upon me. Does this just mean that it's taking a rest?
I could change it. I'm just,
We're almost to the end,
It's okay.
so.
you can keep going.
I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge you. What you say, think, and feel. This is sort of like a really good leader or manager knows that is acknowledging individuals in the company and the organization that are sort of like wallflowers, right? They haven't, for whatever reason, been really brought in. And so we work to include them. There's that acknowledgement. In families, we use the example of you've got like a teen that's acting out, and you and your spouse are sitting at the table, and he is sitting, what are we gonna do about him? Right? Well, I don't know what we're gonna do about him, but if he screws up again, he's out. And him is sitting right there. And chances are, if you asked him what's going on and involved him in the decision making, you might not have the acting out behavior. That's the acknowledgement part. What you say, what you think, what you feel. I don't have to agree with it, but it matters, right? So this does not mean that you go back to your desk and you say to your colleague, I just want you to know, I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge you. What you say, think, and feel matters, right? They'll think you're crazy. But it does mean that in everything that you do, in your interaction, that you bring that kind of energy. And that you're really honest when you're not present by saying something like, I just have to tell you, I'm sorry, but last night when we were having that conversation, I was so not present. And I recognize it now. And I'm wondering if we could revisit it. Or, I know that you want to talk about such and such, but I can't give you right now my full present listening. Or, I feel so triggered right now that I would love to table this discussion because I know that if I could come back and be in a more responsive state, I might actually be able to get to resolution. When I teach conflict resolution, or how to have a difficult conversation, at the foundation of that is, you can't begin to do that unless or until you're in responsive relational mindset and you're perfectly present. All right, so let me just check the time here. We have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, yeah, perfect. I want you to grab a partner. We're just going to do a quick exercise. And if possible, just to get up and partner up with somebody down the other side of the room. I want you to take your chairs and you're going to put them. Come on over. You're going to put them like this. Oh, again, for partner. So I just want to give you, this is just a really brief tutorial because some people will say, well, how can I, what are some strategies that I can use to put myself in the framework of being really present conversationally? All right, and there's 4 things that we're going to do. I'm going to give you a prompt, you're going to have a discussion, but you're going to be doing these 4 things. Number 1 is you're going to make and sustain eye contact. So you're going to imagine there's a bubble around the 2 of you.
Oh my gosh, here we go.
And it might feel really uncomfortable, but you're going to make and sustain eye contact throughout the conversation. You're actually going to lean your bodies in so that you're not sitting way back, you're not crossed. You're going to kind of lean into each other. That's not fair. Cheaters.
Yeah.
You're going to offer each other signs that you're listening, which would be verbal or nonverbal cues, I'm listening, and even some what we call paraverbal cues, which would be, okay, like shaking of your head. This all might feel a little contrived, but you're going to do that. And you can feel free to use inquiry. So if there's something that you want more information about, feel free to ask a question. Tell me more about that. In other words, you're going to be so present, you're going to try to draw forth from the person more information. Decide who's going to be person A and who's going to be person B. Want to be A? Sure. Okay. Person A. For the next 2 timed minutes, I want you to talk to person B about a communication skill that you feel is really weak in you, that you would love to have more fully improved. Like if I could wave a magic wand, maybe it's conflict, whatever it is, but I want you to talk about a weakness that you have related to communication. And I want you to just keep going. And person B, if you notice that they're starting to peter out, ask them a question, okay? But make and sustain eye contact for 2 full minutes. And and when I say switch, we're gonna switch. Ready?
Oh my God.
And go.
This is almost as awkward as the second time. Okay, conflict. So I would say conflict.
Actually, I think
Avoid my
every time I do
conflict
like too bad.
and dealing
But
with discipline.
I'll go talk to somebody, but I'll be on my
So
phone
let's say
while I talk to
if
them, or my people who are in the office, and I'll start answering emails while I'm talking to
then
them.
I get a little like soft spot if I don't do
Stories about kids,
HR role, it's important.
it's
And
like a
big
pet
sim
peeve of yours, and I can't have
where
phones
I
on
have
the
to
table. I try it.
and it's not the right direction.
Get both things. I think I could do 2 things at once. I could listen to
So conflict and dealing with that with employee on
or
employee
I could
is my
use
hardest
that
part.
to like social work.
I think it's easier to do when you do a
Listen
phone.
to conversation.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think I could, yeah, I guess it
What's
is
really, really rude.
Yeah, I would say the phone conversations because you're not staring at the
I'm not
person.
so sure
And when
how
you
long
sit
it's
across from the
for.
person, they start crying.
But,
Yeah,
like,
I think the most is
Mhm.
even though the conversations
but I almost
have
brought my
with them
phone
aren't
over.
as intense
So
as
I
the
was like, yeah,
conversations that the
no,
managers
just
have.
because I'm so used to having
So
people
having
where
one
I
phone, I
go,
would say, is
even if I'm not.
definitely
But the weird
a
thing
more
is, sometimes I have
easier portion.
like I just don't think my finger on it. It's higher for phone calls.
Above
Like I
the
almost
manager,
like,
Yeah.
your HR.
Yeah.
Interrupting
I
the
automatically
manager
just get
has that
nervous.
conversation over and over again, and then it's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
HR,
Yeah.
HR is calling me.
I think it automatically just makes me so much more nervous. But I always try to ease the nerves by saying,
Yeah, but
I'm
some
not
people
here to
are on their
lecture you,
phone,
I'm
just
not here to
like I'm just like,
scold
oh,
you, it's more
like
so what can I do to work with you? But they automatically think it's just me writing them up and giving them the whole thing, and yes, it is, but it's not the end of the world. Yes,
But then I
the
get
end of the
home,
world. I would say that's the hardest thing that I have to do is we have to have sex, so we try to conflict.
I like to talk on the house phone,
That's real
beyond my
reasons.
And go ahead and switch.
I would say that they lie half the time.
You can finish up your thought and then go ahead and switch.
I would say they lie.
Alright, so I think one of my weaknesses is coaching. You think it wouldn't be a lot of it, but I'm very reactive rather than responsive. And I will tell you, I've been preaching to respond, not react my entire career here.
Okay, yeah.
But there are things that just trigger me to just react. I was coaching somebody last night, literally, and she started bawling. And I'm trying to do it as nice as I possibly can, and she just felt that everything she was doing was wrong, so therefore, I felt as though I brought that out, like, maybe I said something the wrong way that caused her to think that everything she does is wrong. So that's something I'm always trying to improve so that they, because I want to be on their team. I want to be on their side. I don't want to be the person up here that you have to do this or you have to do it this way. I want to empower people. But for some reason, sometimes it just comes out wrong.
Do you think that they are intimidated by you?
Yes.
And then they automatically just think that you're yelling at them and then it triggers you to be reactive
Yes.
because they're acting that way?
And I'm loud by nature.
So am I.
Even if I'm not yelling, they think I'm yelling.
Even the way I would
Just
want
because I'm so loud.
Yeah.
I know they do, because even just being there last night, like there was a chocolate evening, I haven't been there for a while. I have 2 people say they're gonna be there, they're standing in the aisle.
Okay.
And I don't want them to feel that way.
Yeah.
True.
But it's also hard to change it if that's already the
And I just said,
So
you might have felt better.
I don't think it's anything you're specifically doing, but that's just their
Because it's
mindset.
general manager versus the person, and I think that's the part I struggle with.
Person
And I
B
make
is
it
just gonna
better.
finish up.
Wow, yours went faster than mine.
Yeah.
But I don't want it.
Right,
Yeah.
just thank your partner.
Sometimes
In order to help people.
No, that's what I mean, yours seemed faster.
All right,
Yeah.
the second time is always faster.
It is.
Does anyone know why?
How?
Anyone know why?
Because you got the stare down.
Yeah.
Because you got comfortable with it, right? It's
Yeah.
always, it's
Yeah,
always a little more
that's true.
difficult for person A, right? And it's always difficult for person B to be the listener. Now, whose eyes are more likely to break, the speaker or the listener? The speaker. And that's okay, that's normal. As long as you're not glancing down at your phone or you're not able to look at all. It's harder on listeners because when I want to convey that I'm fully present and listening, I lock in. When you lock in, you can be in a crowded airport. You can be in that crowded restaurant. When you lock in, it is if you have created that sort of bubble of protection around you, which really holds the conversation. We are so unaccustomed to making and sustaining eye contact that if you were to go home later today and initiate a conversation with someone who knows you well and lock in like this, they're going to look at you and think, well, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? What's going on here? Because they're not accustomed to being communicated with in that way. All right? So just tell me, just briefly, what was that like? I know I set you up for it, but when I'm coming around the room and watching, I'm listening with my eyes. I'm not really focusing in on what you're talking about. I have no idea what you were talking about, but I'm looking at the energy that's transpiring between the two of you, right? So everybody was in it. So what was it like?
I actually strive to do this all the time. Like I always talk about my kids. I'm like that typical parent, but when my kids want something, I don't let them ask. They have to come, they have to stand, they have to make eye contact, they have to tell me clearly what it is that and then whatever it is they want, I'll give it to them. Like, I don't care. But it's about how they're asking, you know what I mean, and the eye contact. And I think a lot of that comes from just being in this job, presentations, you know, like if people come up after presentations, they'll say, wow, it's just amazing, you know, you get eye contact the whole time and that kind of stuff. But it's always an important thing, you know, I've always felt that to be an important thing, so natural.
There was a study done on TED Talks that go viral. Like, what are some of the qualities and characteristics of the TED Talk speaker that goes viral? And as you know, sometimes there are hundreds of people in an audience during a TED Talk. The speaker's ability to make eye contact throughout the presentation, even in the room of 400 people, is actually felt by the viewer who's sitting at home on a Friday night watching the video. That is how locked in they are. The eye contact is no joke. And so if you are a public presenter, knowing that is gold in your effectiveness. It's part of how you made them feel. Again, people will often leave a presentation and think, oh my God, I love that, there's so much great content. But part of why they loved it so much was how the speaker made them feel. So yeah, aspire to that, just that piece. And notice then how when you're in conversation with others, how difficult it is. It is a skill that's so important, it's always been important, but it's diminishing in our ability to do it. Other comments? Yes.
I don't really know. I think it's just a point I want to make. So I can stand in front of a room and talk about anything but myself. So like standing in front of Denise, sitting in front of Denise and talking about something negative about myself was just so difficult. And I mean, she kind of aided in the conversation, but I don't know why that's so weird for me to talk about myself, but I can talk in front of a group of 500 people about anything.
Yes, so when you're in front of a group, you're in control of the group.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in the one-on-one talking about a vulnerability that was intentional on my part, I wanted you to talk about a vulnerability because it's difficult for us to kind of out ourselves like that, right? And it's incumbent upon the listener in how they're listening to hold a safe space for that, right? So it was meant to make you somewhat uncomfortable, but it's not surprising to me that you feel complete comfort. You can be in front of a group presenting about anything, but when there's an intimacy that's present when it's one-on-one. Yeah. So what I noticed about the two of you, because I noticed that there was more of a dialogue happening, that what tends to happen when, and this is certainly true by the time we get to person B, is what the energy between you shifts because now you're fully in dialogue. There's more of an exchange going on, and it is because the two of you have hit upon something that you resonate with. In communication studies, we call that a point of identification. And it might be something totally unrelated to whatever the assignment was. But as soon as you find that place with someone where you identify, it's like boom, then you're off to the races in the conversation, which is why this little nugget of knowledge is so important for those of you in the room for whom it is absolutely essential that you're meeting people for the first time, a lot of different people, and you have one chance to get the sale. You have one chance to make a difference, whether it's a networking event or it's a client and you want to win their business. You have one chance, and you want to find that place, that moment of identification. This is what is the difference between someone who has to do small talk and someone who's exceptional at it. Having a 2-minute conversation with someone that made an impact. Yes.
So when Ed started talking, I immediately wanted to say, Michael does the same thing.
Right. But you probably tempered that a little, right? Because being a good present conversationalist means he needs to play that out. Then you can share about Ed, or about Michael. Michael and who were you talking about? Okay. Michael and Ed, there was the point of identification. Just be very conscious of this, especially if you're chatting with someone you don't know very well. What was the moment where we were off to the races? That conversation just took on a life of its own. It's because you met. It's a highly persuasive tool as well. It's really, really important in sales that you quickly establish the point of identification and connection, because you know what? Then I will buy the knives from you that you begged to come over to my house. And I was like, I don't want this person. I'm not buying. I'm not doing it. And suddenly I've got a new set of knives. Okay? Really, really important. These interpersonal skills and cultivating that sense of presence. And this is like old school Aristotle principles of rhetoric. All right. Any other observations about that?
That's the heart of what we do,
I know it is.
right there on the button.
Yep. And you probably didn't even need to study the principles of Aristotle, but it's all there. Right? But the person who intuitively knows the importance of these really basic conversational tools that create connection are going to be your best salespeople. And whether they're formally trained in that or informally trained in that, it's so important. They have this understanding about what really matters. Because when I feel like you and I, like me and the knife person, if we've stumbled upon that point of connection and I'm writing the check or giving my credit card, and this has happened to all of us. But you go back and you ask yourself why. Why and how is it that I have that new set of knives on my kitchen now that I swore I was not going to buy? It was because of the way the person engaged me and how that made me feel. There's so much more I can say about that dyad, but we're really coming here to the end. I want to give you one more tool to think about, and you can think about it because the acronym is THINK. This is a principle that is so important to conscious and mindful communication. It's a tool that I use and I rely upon, especially when I'm feeling reactive. Let your words, let your thoughts pass through the 5 gates. And the 5 gates are, before I hit send, before I open my mouth, is what I'm about to say, is what I'm about to send even true? If it's not, what? Zip it up. Do not send it. Is it helpful? And what we mean by helpful is, does this move things along? Does this have some kind of momentum to it? Or does this keep us stuck? Or worse, does this regress us? Take us back in time. If this is not truly helpful, no way. Or if it's gonna harm, no. I do not open my mouth, I do not press send. Is it insightful? Meaning, does this lift this conversation to a different kind of level? in my life, those are the only conversations that I'm interested in having. And I can be with the person who's complaining and groveling and gossiping and all of that. And all I'm thinking about is, how can I turn this conversation so that we are both uplifted? So is there insight here? Are we activated or stimulated? I call them lifting conversations. Is the person better for having had a conversation with me in the first place? Is it necessary? Think about if we all only spoke and communicated when it was necessary, we would be quiet a great deal of the time. And the quality of what it is that we shared would be much better. So is it even necessary for me? Think about all of the emails that you will read today, or the communications you will have with others that when you think about it, not even necessary. Was not necessary for me to know that right now, or to need that right now. And then, is it kind? Is it kind? Even if it's evaluation, even if it's assessment, even if it's something difficult, can I cast it in a way that it is experienced as kind? So is it true? Is it helpful, insightful, necessary, kind? Think. Right? This is a wonderful acronym to use for us in our busy lives when we're just trying to get through and we're communicating all the time. Thinking about think, having it in your back pocket. Whenever you are uncertain, you've written an email or a text and you are feeling, I'm not really sure, don't send it until you are sure. Run it through the 5 gates. This is what it means to communicate with a lot of presence, with high emotional intelligence. The pathway of emotional intelligence goes like this. Self-awareness and self-regulation are all about you. That's where it begins. Intrinsic motivation is about you. But if I am intrinsically motivated, it impacts others. It's contagious. Others want it. They are inspired by it. So intrinsic motivation is actually the bridge between myself and others. Empathy and having strong social skills is about the other. It's about our relationships. So emotional intelligence collectively is about mastery of self and mastery of others, or mastery of relationships. And the bridge between those two is living a life where you feel intrinsically motivated, that your life has deep purpose and meaning, and that is how you show up in your work, in your personal life, in your leadership. Emotional intelligence, in a nutshell, is a grand act of care. If I work on my own self-awareness, and if I work on my ability to be well managed, I'm caring for myself. If I work on my empathy skills, if I work on my capacity for compassion, and if I work on being the sort of person that shows up present, I'm taking care of others. Going back to the brain, whenever I'm engaged in something, so if I operate in a way where I'm living out the qualities of emotional intelligence, self-care, and I'm caring for others, and that circuitry in my brain that makes me feel good, like I have value, like my life is meaningful, gets activated, and I feel better. And when I feel better, so do those around me. I've so appreciated the last 3 months with you. This is content that I just am so passionate about. I'm so glad that of the menu of offerings you chose this first. This is a wonderful foundation for all the other kinds of trainings that we offer. So work with the content. Any questions before? I know we're slightly over the noon hour. Remember that videos of these sessions are in the portal, as are the supportive email that follows up. Now, did you all know that? I wanna make sure. Have you been receiving or getting to look at the supportive emails? They're in the portal, right?
I don't know if they're in the portal, but I get them in my inbox.
You got them in your inbox?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Nope, never got them, like I said,
okay.
so I'm not sure.
your junk and spam?
Yep,
Yeah, I wanna make
half the
sure.
resumes go to
Like,
junk,
for
so I have
example,
to
did you
check
get a
it.
copy of the Relationship Bill of Rights?
Yes.
Okay, good, as an email or in the portal?
Oh. I definitely saw it in the portal too.
Okay. Just a couple of things, I just want you to make sure that you know how to get into that portal, right?
Namastream.
NamaStream, because everything's there, including the emails, and I wanna make sure, and I'm gonna follow up with Sarah, I wanna make sure you're also, because usually you will receive from, I write them, but they come from Studio B, a follow-up email with a review of what we did, and then some supplementary materials, right? Within 2 days of the training. So if you didn't, just let me know so I can make sure we can resend it, you know, whatever you need. And if there's anything that I've said along the way that you really latched onto or you wanna know more about, again, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what you can know about emotional intelligence. You can always reach out to me. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.